Thank you, Mr. Chairman, especially for holding this hearing on this important topic. This certainly seems to me one of those things that's an all hands on deck kind of a situation, and I appreciate the focus on it. Appreciate the panel being here this morning discussing these issues. As a former director of my state agency, my agriculture department, I certainly appreciate the presence of our state veterinarians here and your approach to helping us learn and be prepared for whatever happens into the future. It seems to me that when the next outbreak occurs, there'll be no time for hand-wringing, but positive action, quick action is what's key. Certainly in my experience, I appreciate Dr. Clifford's valuable help in dealing with animal health issues in my state, and very, very appreciative of you being here this morning. So I love this no time restraint. That's very valuable.
Well, be careful, because we all may be in trouble by the time this is over.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to delve into this subject. It's very important to all of us. Just a couple questions to begin with, Dr. Clifford, concerning the National Animal Health Laboratory Network. My understanding is that the federal funding currently supplies approximately 5% of the cost of operating the state lab system. The same system, though, is critical to detection, response, recovery from disease outbreaks that similar to what we've just experienced. So, for this year, can you tell us how the initial cases in any given state were detected and by whom? And then to follow up on that question, as part of this year's outbreak, the Iowa lab has been open, I believe, 24/7, and running multiple shifts, keeping up with all the demands for testing and so forth. Do the labs, do you think, have the support they need to sustain this type of workload in this effort?
Thanks, Congressman, for that question. The National Animal Health Laboratory Network is an extremely important part of our infrastructure in the United States to be able to address not just this issue, but a lot of animal health issues. As you're probably well aware, there was language in the Farm Bill that addressed this issue for the non-laboratories, but that did not come with funding. And I think the non-laboratories throughout this country are at different levels of funding, but we definitely need resources for those laboratories to be able to do the work that we so urgently need them to do and be prepared. To speak to a specific lab in a specific state, I think we would have to probably defer more to the states themselves and the labs themselves to address those specifically. But yes, funding, I know, is needed for these laboratories, and we do the best we can with the funding we have to provide them resources. I know that the House markup had additional resources for the non-laboratories, which was very welcomed and very much appreciated. As far as who does the diagnosis, it will vary in any particular location or state, but I can tell you a lot of these state non-laboratories are very much involved in all this testing. And I know, for example, in Minnesota and Iowa during this outbreak, there has been a huge effort there with regards to putting and having personnel available to do around-the-clock testing. We pay based upon, or we basically destroy animals, depopulate these animals based on presumptive positives, and those presumptive positives are done by the non-laboratories.
Another question, Dr. Clifford, and we touched on this in previous questioning concerning trade and economic issues and the steps that APHIS and USDA are taking as far as negotiating with foreign governments about vaccines and the potential that they hold as far as the impacts that could have on poultry exports. But on the other hand, there's interest, I know, in grocery and food producers, industries about the flexibility with imports of poultry products, egg imports specifically, due to many shortages that we're experiencing. Could you talk about any progress on that front?
Actually, we've had shipments from the European Union, and also we've had recent shipments of eggs for breaker facilities from Mexico into the U.S. now to help address some of the shortages that we have. And I know of two countries right now, one Mexico, the other it's the Netherlands, and I'm not sure if we're bringing in from other countries from the European Union or not, right off the top of my head, but that's something I can find out. So that has definitely and will definitely continue to help us be able to address some of the shortages we have in the U.S.
Thank you. Dr. Swain, Mr. Costa asked you some questions about the production of viable vaccination. So I appreciate your comments there about steps in this process to help stop or spread this and eradicate the virus. I hate to be think about the sky is falling kind of scenario, but based on your observations, when you're talking about the spread of this disease and the additional or potential risks to poultry operations around the world, specifically in other countries, Central America, South America, certainly Europe and Asia, will this, these flyways obviously go back and forth every year. What are we looking at in the future here? Are we just keeping our fingers in the dikes, so to speak, and trying to control something that is way bigger than us?
We can look back at data generated in Asia, for example, from our Korean colleagues. So they've had 2 years of incursions from migratory waterfowl into their country, bringing H5N8 high-path virus in. The worst year was actually in the fall of 2013, winter 2014. The second year it reoccurred, but it was not as severe. So I think the lesson, this has also been repeated in the last 15 years, where you would have an incursion with migratory waterfowl. You have a real severe year, then it gets mild, and then it kind of disappears in waterfowl, and it's only propagated in the farming system. For us, the advantage we are at this point in the U.S. is all the surveillance evidence would suggest that we don't have the virus in current farms, so our real risk is what would come back through the migratory flyways. And that emphasizes the role of colleagues in wildlife health, including the USGS, USDA Wildlife Services, in surveillance programs that are being set up across southern Canada, northern U.S., even down the Atlantic flyway coast, trying to get a handle on, is the virus in birds that are migrating or not, and if the virus is identified in particular flyways and geographic areas, then there should be information disseminated within those geographic areas for farmers to be extra vigilant in biosecurity and to very quickly report any abnormal clinical signs that might occur. One thing that's really to our advantage is that the flyways we have in North America do generally go north and south in four different flyways. But the viruses don't readily go into Central and South America from us, nor from their viruses coming north. The mixing is a much smaller, it's a really small area with a very few number of species that cover those across both of our hemispheres. That's to our advantage, and it's also to their advantage that it's a sort of a critical control point, is if we can control outbreaks in poultry populations by preventing those, we reduce the likelihood of poultry infections, and that would be a way of amplifying it. And if we can do that, hopefully the virus will self-burn out in wildlife populations. But surveillance by USDA Wildlife Services, USGS, and university partners is critical to find the virus.
Thank you. Dr. Clifford, going back to the authorization for the National Lab Network, what beyond diagnostic capabilities should we be considering to enhance this disease prevention?
Congressman, specifically to the nons themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think probably making sure that we have the proper infrastructure within those laboratories to deal with diseases that are zoonotic and have zoonotic potential.
That would be your priority. Okay. Then I have a question I'd like to ask. Mr. Kelly from Mississippi had to leave early, had a flight to catch.
Would the gentleman yield?
Oh, Mr. Costa, please.
Just for us lay people here, what is zoonotic?
It's diseases that can cross from animals to people.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Like AI. This one doesn't, thank goodness, but.
No, good question. Mr. Kelly has an extensive broiler industry in his state of Mississippi, and concerned about, apparently there are no infected birds, at least that have been detected there yet. So his question was, why? Why do you think broilers have not yet been affected, if anybody has an opinion on that? Maybe they just do a great job in Mississippi as far as control.
Congressman, I think it's age-related. The broilers typically go to market in 56 days, and most of the birds that have been infected with this virus have been older than that. As a matter of fact, one of the opportunities for managing the virus has been the early marketing of birds, and particularly turkeys. I know in parts of the Midwest, some of the turkeys have gone to market much sooner than they would under ordinary circumstances. At least those are our thoughts in North Carolina. I'll defer to my USDA colleagues and Dr. Hartman.
Well, Congressman, and it's interesting to note that that did happen in Minnesota. We had broilers right in the heart of our turkey growing area where there was infection, and the broilers never were affected at all. So I think the chickens are a little harder to be infected, than it takes a higher dose, and they don't transmit it as much, but also the age factor was there as well.
Good.
If I may make just a quick comment, there are probably two factors that have impacted the lack of broiler infections. One is that there appears to be, from field information, a age susceptibility. So older birds are more susceptible than younger birds, and broilers are all very young, so they're less susceptible. The second thing is that in farm operations, there are fewer entry points on a broiler farm because generally most of those have a family taking care of them, and feed trucks only come usually at the third or fourth week of grow out, so there are very few points of entry. Versus if you look at a layer farm where you have very large farms, lots of people going on off of farms, lots of trucks, vehicles, equipment that may be shared, turkey farms where the birds are on the ground longer, you have a greater chance for moving a virus onto a farm that's a turkey or a layer farm than you do a broiler farm.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit my other questions for the record, but appreciate all your input.